Imagine booking what seems like the perfect vacation home. The photos look stunning, the reviews are glowing. But what if behind those doors, something sinister is waiting for you? Airbnb is supposed to be a safe escape, a home away from home. But for some, it became a nightmare they never woke up from. From hidden cameras and vanishing guests to brutal murders inside rentals, these are the most terrifying true Airbnb horror stories. Real cases that prove not every host is who they claim to be. And sometimes, checking in means never checking out. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Airbnb is supposed to be a home away from home, a place of adventure, relaxation, and escape. But for Carla Stefaniak, her dream vacation turned into a nightmare. She checked in, but she never checked out. In November 2018, Carla Stefaniak, a 36-year-old woman from Florida, was excited for her getaway. She and her sister-in-law, April Burton, planned a birthday trip to Costa Rica, a week of sun, adventure, and unforgettable memories. For most of the trip, they stayed at an upscale resort, soaking in the beauty of the country. But on November 27th, the day before she was supposed to fly home, Carla made a last-minute change. Instead of staying at a big resort, she booked an Airbnb, a small, cozy apartment on the outskirts of San Jose. Her sister-in-law had already flown back home, so Carla was staying alone for one night. That was her first mistake, because she had just walked into a death trap. That evening, Carla texted her friend back in Florida. She joked about the power going out at the Airbnb, saying it was sketchy and that she was feeling uneasy. But no one took the concern seriously. After all, it was just one night, and she was scheduled to fly home the next morning. But that morning came, and Carla never made it to the airport. Her family immediately knew something was wrong. Carla was always online, always texting, always posting. But now, nothing. Her last text had been sent at 8 p.m. the night before, and then, silence. For hours, her friends and family frantically messaged her. But her phone, it was dead. And when they contacted the Airbnb host, he said Carla had already left for the airport at 5 a.m. She supposedly got into an Uber and disappeared, but there was just one problem. Carla had already arranged a different ride, one that was scheduled for 8 a.m., hours after she had supposedly left. And when they checked airport security cameras, she was never there. She had never left that Airbnb. Days passed. Carla's family flew to Costa Rica to search for her. They pressured the authorities, demanded answers, and kept asking questions the Airbnb host couldn't answer. And then, the nightmare became real. On December 3rd, 2018, police searched the area around the Airbnb, and that's when they found her body. Face down, half buried in mud, covered in plastic, just 100 feet from the Airbnb rental. She had been beaten, stabbed in the neck, and left to rot. And the killer had been watching the police search the entire time. The moment police found Carla, they knew who had done it, because her murderer was right there, standing in plain sight. Bismarck Espinoza Martinez, a 32-year-old security guard who worked at the Airbnb, a man who had keys to every apartment, a man who had seen Carla checking in, alone, and a man who lied about seeing her leave at 5 a.m. His DNA was all over Carla's body. The police found his fingerprints on the plastic used to cover her, and in his apartment. Blood, evidence, everything pointed straight to him. And when police arrested him, he didn't deny it. He just smirked. In 2020, Bismarck Espinoza Martinez was found guilty of Carla's murder. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison. But for many, that wasn't enough. Carla had trusted that Airbnb was safe. She had booked a home, not knowing a predator had the keys. And she had no idea that her one-night stay would be her last. Carla Stefaniak's story isn't the only one. Hidden cameras in rental homes, guests disappearing without a trace, hosts who are not who they say they are. Because when you sleep in a stranger's home, you never truly know who's watching, or who has the keys to your door. We trust that when we book an Airbnb, we're stepping into a private space, a place where we can unwind, sleep, and feel safe. But for some, their Airbnb wasn't just a home, it was a trap, and the host was always watching. In 2019, a young couple from the UK, Dougie Hamilton and his girlfriend, planned a romantic trip to Toronto, Canada. They booked a beautiful Airbnb, a modern apartment with high ceilings, stylish furniture, and great reviews. Everything looked perfect. But what they didn't know was that they were not alone. The first night was uneventful. They unpacked, made dinner, watched TV. But something felt off. It wasn't obvious. It was just a feeling, like the walls had eyes. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, Dougie sat on the couch, absent-mindedly staring around the living room. That's when he noticed it. The alarm clock on the TV stand. It was facing the bed. At first, it seemed normal, until he took a closer look. There was something inside the clock, something behind the glass, barely visible, a tiny glimmering lens, a camera, recording everything. His stomach dropped. His hands started shaking. Was it just one camera, or were there more? He grabbed the alarm clock, turned it over. His worst fear was confirmed. A hidden compartment held a small memory card. Their entire stay had been recorded. Every conversation, every private moment. And the worst part? They had no idea who was watching, or where the footage had already been sent. Shaken, they immediately called the Airbnb. They expected swift action, a serious investigation. But what they got was silence. Airbnb didn't respond quickly. They didn't seem alarmed. And the host vanished. The listing was taken down, the profile deleted. But the damage was already done. And the most horrifying thought, how many other guests had been filmed? How many other people had their private lives recorded, uploaded, or worse, sold? The UK couple's story wasn't an isolated incident. In the years following, dozens of guests came forward. Some found cameras inside smoke detectors. Some discovered tiny lenses inside power outlets. Some realized too late, only after footage of them appeared online. The truth? There's a hidden epidemic of voyeur hosts on Airbnb. And the worst part? Many guests never even know they're being watched. Because that harmless smoke detector might have a lens inside. That TV remote might be recording everything you do, and the next time you think you're completely alone in your rental, someone might be watching you, right now. We expect privacy and safety when we stay in an Airbnb, a place that's comfortable, clean, and ordinary. But sometimes, behind the walls of these homes, behind locked doors, there are things we were never meant to find. And once we do, there's no way out. In 2021, a couple from the US was traveling through Canada, looking for an affordable and quiet Airbnb rental outside the city. They found the perfect house, a beautiful home, newly listed, with great reviews. It was secluded but safe looking. The owner, a man named Daniel, responded quickly and politely. Everything about the booking felt legit, so they packed their bags and checked in. not knowing they had just walked into a nightmare. The house was exactly as it had looked in the photos, clean, cozy, and modern. There was just one thing that felt off. A locked door at the end of the hallway. They assumed it was a storage room. After all, some Airbnbs have areas the guests aren't allowed to access. But as the night went on, something wasn't right. At around midnight, the couple was getting ready for bed. The house was completely silent until they heard it. A slow, dragging sound coming from beneath the floorboards, like something was moving downstairs. Then, a thud. Then, footsteps. At first, they thought it was just the house settling. But then, the footsteps stopped, right beneath them, like someone was listening, like someone was waiting. And then, the doorknob to the locked door rattled. Someone, or something, was trying to get out. The couple froze. They were supposed to be alone in the house, but someone was downstairs. They grabbed their phones, turned on the flashlight, and slowly approached the locked door. That's when they noticed it. The door frame was scratched. The lock had been replaced recently, and when they leaned in closer, they heard breathing. Someone was standing just on the other side, waiting, watching, listening. Panic set in. They bolted for the front door, but as they fumbled with the lock, a loud bang from the basement, like someone had thrown themselves against the locked door. They didn't wait, didn't look back. They grabbed their bags, threw the door open, and sprinted to their car. As they pulled away, they saw it. A figure standing in the upstairs window. Not the Airbnb host, someone else. Someone who was never mentioned in the listing. When they reported the Airbnb to customer support, they expected immediate action. Instead, Airbnb did nothing. The host's listing disappeared overnight. No trace of the house, no record of their booking. But that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, local news broke a story. That same house had been raided by police, because hidden behind that locked basement door was a tiny room, a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and chains bolted to the walls. Someone had been living down there, trapped. And the worst part? No one knew how many guests had stayed in that house before and never left. The reality is, when you stay in an Airbnb, you never really know who else has the keys. You never know what's behind the locked doors. And sometimes, those locked doors aren't meant to keep you out. They're meant to keep something in. But what happens when it finally gets out? We think of Airbnb as an escape, a place to unwind, disappear from daily life, but not disappear forever. But for one guest, checking into this rental was the last thing they ever did, because they were never seen again. And to this day, no one knows what happened to them. In 2017, a woman named Natalie Holloway, not to be confused with the famous missing case, was traveling alone through British Columbia, Canada. She was an experienced solo traveler, always cautious about her stays. That night, she booked a small but cozy Airbnb cabin in the mountains, a quiet getaway outside the city, perfect for a night of rest. The reviews were great. The location was remote but safe. The host, James, had a friendly profile. Everything seemed perfect. And when Natalie checked in, there was nothing wrong. At least, not at first. Natalie texted her sister shortly after checking in. "Made it to the Airbnb. It's so quiet out here. No signal, but the Wi-Fi works. Gonna crash early." That was the last message she ever sent. The next morning, she was gone. And the only thing left behind? Her fully packed suitcase, her wallet and phone still on the nightstand, and the door locked from the inside. Her family grew worried when she didn't check out. Her sister tried calling, but no answer. When the host, James, was contacted, He claimed she had left early in the morning, saying she wanted to catch a sunrise hike. But something wasn't right, because all of her belongings were still inside the Airbnb. Her hiking boots were untouched. Her car was still parked in the driveway. And the Airbnb's smart lock logs showed the door never opened again after 10:15 p.m. the night she checked in. She had vanished without a trace. When police arrived at the Airbnb, James stuck to his story. She told me she was going hiking at sunrise, that's all I know. But as investigators searched the property, things didn't add up. Her bed was untouched, like she never even slept in it. Security cameras at the nearby road never showed her leaving. Neighbors never saw her arrive or leave. And then they checked the basement, a small unfinished space beneath the cabin. Inside, a mattress on the floor, a rope tied to a metal pipe, and in the corner, a woman's bracelet. Not Natalie's. Police dug deeper into James's history, and what they found was chilling. He had previously been accused of stalking female guests, but Airbnb never banned him. One woman even reported that he had entered the rental late at night while she was sleeping, but there was never enough proof. So he kept hosting, kept luring in new victims. And now, Natalie was gone. Despite extensive searches, Natalie Holloway was never found. No body, no signs of struggle, just her abandoned belongings and a locked door. The host was never officially charged. The Airbnb listing disappeared overnight. Airbnb never made a public statement about it, and James moved to a new city, changed his name, and started hosting again. People go missing every day. Some disappear in forests, cities, and deserts. But others vanish from behind locked doors, from the very homes they trusted. And sometimes, the last place they're ever seen is an Airbnb. We think of Airbnb as a place for vacations, celebrations, unforgettable memories. But sometimes, it becomes a crime scene. And for 5 unsuspecting guests, this party would be their last. It was Halloween night, 2019, in Orinda, California. A large, upscale home sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A woman had rented it for the night, claiming it was for a family gathering, a peaceful retreat away from the California wildfires. But that was a lie. Instead, it became an Airbnb Halloween mansion party. Word spread fast on Snapchat and Instagram. Soon, over 100 people arrived. Strangers packed into the house, drinking, dancing, celebrating. Outside, the neighbors noticed. They heard the music, saw the crowds, and some of them called the police. Inside, the party was wild. People drank and smoked, crowds crammed into every room. The dance floor was packed, and no one knew that among them, a killer was waiting. At 10:50 p.m. it happened. A sudden burst of gunfire. Screams erupted over the music. A stampede of terrified guests pushed toward the exits. People trampled over each other, clawing to escape. Outside, partygoers ran into the night, their costumes stained with blood. And inside, the house had turned into a slaughterhouse. When police arrived, the once lively Airbnb was silent. The music had stopped. The guests were gone. But the blood was everywhere. Inside, they found 5 people dead, 5 young lives cut short in an instant. And the shooter had vanished. News of the Airbnb party massacre spread across the country. People wanted answers. Who was the shooter? Why did this happen? But when the police dug into the case, they found something even more disturbing. Because this wasn't just some random act of violence. It was a planned attack, a targeted shooting, and someone at the party had been marked for death. The home was immediately removed from Airbnb's listings. Airbnb faced massive backlash. People demanded answers. How could an unverified guest rent a mansion and turn it into a deadly underground nightclub? And Airbnb? Panicked. They banned party houses overnight, announced new safety measures, swore this would never happen again. But for 5 victims, it was already too late. A night of costumes and celebration ended in death and devastation. A house filled with life, left silent and haunted. And the worst part? There are hundreds of illegal Airbnb parties happening every weekend. Some people walk away from them, and some never leave at all. We open our homes to strangers, trusting them to treat our space with respect. We assume they're vacationers, travelers, guests. But what happens when the people you invite in turn your home into a poisonous nightmare? For one couple, their Airbnb side hustle would cost them everything. In December 2018, Daniel and Jocelyn Medrano were just an ordinary couple living in Omaha, Nebraska. They were preparing for the holidays, excited for a trip out of town, when Jocelyn had an idea. Why don't we rent the house while we're gone? We could make some extra money. It seemed perfect. Their home was spacious and clean, located in a quiet, friendly neighborhood. They had used Airbnb before, renting out a guest room occasionally. But this would be their first time leaving the entire house to strangers, a temporary exchange, a way to make some quick holiday cash. And so, with one click, they listed their home, never realizing they had just invited disaster. A booking request came in almost immediately. A guest named Travis reserved the house for 1 week. His profile looked legitimate. He had a few reviews, nothing spectacular, but nothing suspicious. He claimed he was in town for a family visit and just needed a quiet place to stay. No problem, Jocelyn thought. She approved the booking. And as they packed their bags for their trip, they had no idea what kind of nightmare they were leaving behind. 2 days later, their neighbor called them. "Hey, I don't want to alarm you, but there's been a lot of activity at your house. Cars coming and going at all hours of the day. People loading in large plastic containers. A strong chemical smell drifting from the windows." Daniel and Jocelyn were confused. They had rented the home to one person, so why did it sound like a full-scale operation was running inside? Something was wrong. Concerned, they called Airbnb's support team. The company told them not to worry. "Most likely it's nothing," they said. But Jocelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. So she called the police. And when officers arrived, they weren't prepared for what they found. The moment police stepped inside, they knew. The air was thick with toxic fumes. The kitchen counters were covered in white powder residue. A makeshift lab setup filled the living room. Glass beakers lined the tables. Large metal pots bubbled with an unknown substance. Plastic tubs of chemicals were stacked near the bathroom. And the worst part? In the garage, they found over 100 pounds of meth in various stages of production. This wasn't just a few people using drugs. This was a full-blown drug lab set up in the middle of their home, their family home. The police moved quickly. They arrested 3 individuals, including Travis, whose real name was Jamison Rivers, a known meth trafficker. But the damage was already done. Because meth isn't just dangerous to cook, it poisons everything it touches. The walls, carpets, and air ducts were soaked with toxic residue. The house was officially declared unlivable. Daniel and Jocelyn were told, "You can't stay here, not without a full hazardous material cleanup." The cleanup cost over $50,000. Insurance wouldn't cover it, because meth contamination wasn't part of their policy. Airbnb's host guarantee program offered them a fraction of what they needed. They were forced to move out. Their dream home became a crime scene, and all because of one Airbnb guest. We open our homes thinking we're making easy money, but the truth? You never know who you're letting in, and for some unlucky hosts, the people they welcome leave behind something they can never erase. Because no matter how much you scrub, how much you clean, the damage is done, and your home might never be yours again. We book Airbnbs to escape. We expect privacy, peace, and solitude. But what if we were never alone? What if someone was already inside, watching, waiting, and living in the walls? For one traveler, the perfect secluded getaway turned into an unimaginable nightmare because they weren't the only guest. In March 2023, an American traveler named Hannah L. was backpacking through Spain. She had spent the last few weeks hopping from city to city: Barcelona, Seville, Madrid. But now she wanted something quiet, somewhere remote, somewhere to disconnect. That's when she found the perfect Airbnb listing: a quaint stone cottage in the hills of Andalusia, surrounded by olive groves, promising peace, fresh air, and privacy. The reviews, glowing; the photos, breathtaking. And the host? A man named Emilio, who barely communicated except to send the check-in instructions. "You'll have the place to yourself," he wrote. And Hannah didn't question it. She should have. At first, everything was perfect. The cottage was just as beautiful as the pictures. She spent her first day exploring the hills, enjoying the silence. But by nightfall, the unease set in. It started with small things: a mug that wasn't where she left it, a window she was sure she had closed, now slightly open, the faintest sound of shuffling footsteps when she was in bed. She told herself it was her imagination, that she was just tired from traveling. But then came the whispering. The second night, as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it, a low murmur coming from inside the house. Hannah froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't her phone. It was inside. And then, a quiet cough. Someone was breathing near her room. The next morning, Hannah woke up exhausted but determined. She was not imagining this. Someone had been inside. So she started searching, checking every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing. Until she noticed something strange. A draft coming from the bookshelf in the hallway, like there was a gap behind it. She pushed the shelf. It was heavier than it should be. And then it moved. Behind it, a hidden door, unlocked. She held her breath and opened it. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. She stepped slowly, heart pounding, and then she saw it. A tiny hidden room with a bed, a pile of clothes, half-eaten food, and standing in the middle of it, an old man in his underwear, staring at her. Hannah screamed and ran upstairs, slamming the bookshelf back into place. Her hands shaking, she grabbed her phone, her bag, her passport, and she ran, straight out the front door, down the dirt road, as fast as she could. When she reached a gas station miles away, she called the police. And when they searched the Airbnb, the man was gone, but his room was still there. And that's when they uncovered the truth. The Airbnb host, Emilio, had been living in the house the entire time. The cottage was his home. He had been renting it out to tourists, while hiding in the secret basement whenever they arrived, listening to them, watching them, only coming out at night. He had done this for years, and no one had ever noticed. Until now. Airbnb immediately removed the listing. They refunded Hannah's stay, but they never issued a public statement. The host vanished, and the cottage was still listed on other sites, but under a different name. And the worst part, no one knows how many other guests stayed there before. How many heard whispers in the night? How many felt watched? And how many never found the door? Some people check into an Airbnb and never check out. Some people sleep soundly, never knowing that someone is watching them, that someone is already inside. Because when you rent a stranger's home, are you really alone? Or is there someone living in the walls, waiting, watching, listening?